On this episode, we answer a lot of questions about getting a book together by myself. Hey everybody, and welcome to Finish Friday, the show that helps more creative people change more lives. I'm your host, Todd B from Tennessee, and I created this show because on a scale of 1 to fielding a bajillion emails that came in after the book launch, finishing creative projects is hard. So you guys know, like, I'm not an email guy, but I got a bunch and I've been doing my best to keep up. And these questions today I've pulled aside specifically because I want to talk about the process of like putting together a book, writing a book, and getting the words necessary to get a book that can be published. The first thing I want to shout out real quick is that you only have 3 days left to get the book. If you're on the fence about this thing, if you're thinking about it at all, definitely go check it out. The first link down below. And I really have no more to say. So let's get into the questions. Arul Nathan asks, how do you keep writing despite the pressures of a full-time job and other aspects? This one is really interesting, and I think it's like one that I'm uniquely positioned to answer because a lot of people who are like, oh yeah, just claim your creative victory, don't have jobs other than to say that you should create your creative victory or whatever. But like, I still have, other than this show and other than writing on the post, I still have like a dedicated full-time job. The way that I do it is that I get up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock every morning and write, right? Like that's my thing. I think the thing that keeps me going and keeps me writing is because I built the habit of writing before I had all of these additional pressures. And for me, it's something that I feel compelled to do. And so with anything like that, if you think you want to be a writer and put together a book, the first thing I suggest is to try and do it for 30 days, even though you have a current full-time job or whatever. And if you can find the time with your current setup, then you can build on that time as you go along. Anthony asks, how long did it take you to write the book? 28 years. That's not exactly true, but I think it's funny when a question like that gets asked because I know what you mean. But there were so many things that came before it. Like there's a chapter in this book that I pulled out from something I heard about, 5 years ago. So whenever you ask the question, I assume you mean how long did it take from starting to write this actual manuscript? And the answer is about a year. Whenever I released my last book, The Creative's Curse, I immediately just jumped back into the process because I think that's how it is for creative people. Like you finish up something just so you can get on to the next thing. And that was definitely it for me. And I had a ghostwriting project that winter that kind of set me back. But for the most part, it took a solid year to get the structure in place, to get all the words in place, and to say what I wanted to say. The actual writing of the book, like the sitting time I was at the typewriter, not extravagant. I probably total, I don't know, 3 months worth of 5 days a week, 6 hours a day or so writing. But then the rest is just editing and coming up with ideas and making sure they all fit within a certain structure. So I would say a year is probably a solid time to write a book. Ifeanyi asks, how did you keep the momentum going through the writing of the book, and how often did you write? Well, first of all, I write every day. That's just my thing, basically. And I didn't write for the book every day, but I write every day because I feel like you have to stay in touch with that craft, with that talent in order to be able to say the words that you want to say instead of spending a bunch of time kind of going back and forth. I try to stay as intimate as I can with my writing and with my craft because I want to make sure I can sit down and say exactly what I need to say. As far as momentum throughout the book, this was kind of a tough one, to be honest, because the first book I sat down and I wrote the thing. And and that was it. And then I went back and went through the processes of editing. But this one, I had a big break in the middle for 2 or 3 months for the simple reason because I wanted to earn some extra money to give this book the proper launch that it deserves. And so, you know, if you click the link, you'll see the sales page, you'll see the copy, you'll see the cover, all of that stuff, the formatting of the book. I funded this whole thing myself, and I knew since I wanted to be at a certain level, I needed to take some extra time to be able to pay for that stuff up front. And to answer your question, it was really hard to kind of get back into it, but I think that space definitely it kept me from rushing out, which is what I was tempted to do in the first place, and it kept me from getting so caught up in my own ideas that I couldn't see the problems with the book. So I hope that that kind of answers your question about momentum. Sarah asks, when it comes to building a routine for writing, would you recommend setting a time limit by which an article, chapter, or a complete book should be finished? Sarah, the best tool that you can possibly find for this is 750words.com. It is probably the website responsible for getting me into a writing habit beyond, you know, the work I was doing at a newspaper back in the day. But that site is going to time you as you write, and it's not going to like flag you for a bunch of edits and stuff like that. The point of 750words.com, and of course I'll link it down below, is to just get you writing. I think for me, putting myself to a timer was one of the best things that I could do. Like when you're just starting out, getting a timer and going for word count only, those are going to be huge boosts in writing what you want to write, and at least getting it out of your head, because I think for most of us, the editing process needs to take a back seat in exchange for the ability to write a bunch of words. So yeah, I would set a timer. I would set a specific time of day. Like I said, I get up early, and I would make sure to hit it as much as possible within that time frame so that you get used to, and your whole body is expecting you to write during that time frame. Holland asked, how do I make a short story long in order to write a book? Roland, this is incredible, because I think it's a big problem for most people. Like the average book, I think, is somewhere between 40 and 50,000 words. And if you have never written that many words at a time, even if you've written blog posts before, that's a really challenging number. And so I think we got to think about a couple of things, right? One option is to just take the Seth Godin route and take little bitty chunks, right? So start to take your blog posts together and do little bitty chunks of a book, and find a bunch of ones that kind of fit a pattern or an idea or a structure. You guys, Malcolm Gladwell, the guy that's famous for Outliers and Blink and The Tipping Point and David and Goliath, like all those books, those chapters were articles in a newspaper first. So don't think that you have to start from scratch every time, or that you have to have just one big session where you're writing all these books. The best way to make a short story long is to add together a bunch of short stories around the same thing. And to wrap up this little question with a more like philosophical tint, I want to tell you something that my English teacher told me back in the day. And he said that writing is like describing a building. You don't just take a look at the whole thing and tell me what it looks like. You write about this brick, and then this brick, and then this brick, and then this brick. And so if you're trying to get more words in your word count, I would take the brick by brick approach. Angelo asked, how do you choose the right editor for your needs? Angelo, this one's really interesting, because I want to point out first and foremost that nobody will be as passionate about your book. Nobody will be as familiar with your book. No one will care as much about your book as you do. And so the editor thing, it is a big question, but the first thing you have to understand that is you are the sole editor of your book when you're going through this process. The way that I would do it, honestly, there's plenty of stuff out there on Fiverr. If you're in that range where you're kind of like just starting out, going to self-publish a book, maybe you don't have that much money up front, I would definitely go to Fiverr. And there are two areas that you need to think about with editing. The first one is content editing, right? Because if you're looking at the big structure of the book, you don't want to have a meticulously proofread book and then not have any structure or pattern to the book. So content editing is a big thing. And what I would remember with that is that ultimately it is your book. And so any suggestions that come back to you from an editor are just suggestions. In this last book, I had a bunch of suggestions come through that I just shot down because I didn't think they fit what I wanted the book to me. But at the same time, there were plenty of questions and suggestions that I thought, oh, that's a gaping hole in my manuscript. So that's what a good content editor can do. And then proofreading obviously is just one of those things that you want to do to check the box. You can get Grammarly, that's going to help out with that. You can also go to Fiverr again, but the more you get it looked over, the more expensive that's going to be. And so for me, I read the audiobook while I was proofreading, so that enabled me to like take out all of those little missteps and missed words and things like that. So those are my thoughts on an editor. KJ asks, where do I start? This is the best question ever because I think it's funny. Most people watching this show, I would guarantee you have a book in you. Actually, everybody watching this show, most people on the planet have a book within them, just because life is so different, and everybody's journey has all these little nuances that aren't found elsewhere. And I would be a very happy person if everyone were to understand that they can write a book. And frankly, I think they should, but of course I do. KJ, I think the best place to start is with what you already have. So I know from your email, you have a show and you talk about tell me something good, and you have these little snippets that people listen to. I think it was a radio show. So I would start right there. I mean, the book that comes to mind instantly is Chicken Soup for the Soul, right? Which is not really a long book with a deep thesis. It really is like piece by piece, encouraging little bits. You don't have, there's so many ways to write a book is the thing. And so you don't have to make it this big, deep, like 90,000 word thing based on scientific principles or whatever. What you do is you start with what you have, and you start with what you've already created, and you say, okay, how can I build on this? The other thing I would recommend if you're trying to figure out where to start writing a book is to read a bunch of books. A bunch of different books by a bunch of different authors of different races and colors and gender, because that helps you kind of broaden what a book can be in your mind. And so those are the two things I would do. I would start with what you have, and then I would read as much as you can to try and get different ideas. And with that, that wraps up episode 44 of Finish Friday. I hope you guys found this helpful. I still have a ton of questions to get through about the book, the marketing and the published side of things. There are a bunch of those still sitting in my inbox that I'm trying to get to, and I'll definitely do a follow-up to this video answering specific questions. So definitely stay tuned with that. This week's Ask the Audience is, are you going to write a book one day? Put your answer down below. I'm interested to see what you all think about this. I hope that there are a bunch of yeses across the board, and I love finding out what you guys are up to. If you haven't bought the book yet, unstoppable.toddbryson.com for 3 more days. For 3 days only, you can get the book, because I got to look at this whole pay what you want thing. I don't know if it's going to work. So that's why I had to put like a hard stop on this thing to see if like generosity will really pay off. And I believe it will. And it looks like so far that it is going to. You guys have come through in spades. So thank you for that. If you haven't got the book yet, check the link down below. Again, I'm Todd B from Tennessee. Like this show if you liked it, and I will talk with you next week.